If killing your future self 30 years from now could grant you financial freedom, would you pull the trigger? The young hitman Joe gave his answer without hesitation. But 30 years later, Joe would also be sent back in time by the time machine to be killed by his younger self from 30 years earlier. So, if you had to choose again now, would you still fire the first shot? It sounds like a tall tale, but in 2044, this is an actual job. In that era, killing is no longer a crime, but a business. The renminbi has become the global currency, and a brand new profession quietly rises. They are called loopers. Imagine, your daily job is to stand, waiting out in the wasteland, waiting for someone from 30 years ahead to appear before you. They arrive blindfolded, with their hands bound. All you need to do is pull the trigger to earn the silver bars strapped to his back, then throw the body into the incinerator, cash the silver in, and keep living large. That's Joseph's daily routine. As the youngest among these assassins, he lives a life everyone envies. A luxury apartment, an expensive sports car, top-shelf drugs, and money that never runs out. In this era, 10% awaken telekinetic abilities, but most can only levitate a coin for a few seconds. Basically, a trivial party trick. Joseph and his crew party day in, day out, as if tomorrow would never come. But they all knew, one day they'd have to face life's ultimate test. They call it closing the loop. What is closing the loop? It means killing your 30 years older self with your own hands. After completing this final job, they receive a massive retirement payout and enjoy 30 lavish years. Sounds perfect, doesn't it? Getting paid to kill a version of yourself, fated to die, and then reap the benefits. Joseph always thought it was the best deal in the world, until his best friend, Seth, came to him. Seth was trembling all over, his face pale as paper. He told Joseph a terrible piece of news. He'd failed to close the loop. When the Seth from 30 years later appeared before him, the young Seth hesitated. He pulled off the man's hood and saw a weathered yet familiar face. In that instant, it was as if he saw his own future, saw the marks time had carved into that face. The shock left Seth completely stunned. He stood and watched helplessly as his 30 years older self ran, committing the greatest taboo of the loopers. Now, two Seths existed in the same spacetime, which was disastrous for the timeline. Soon, his fellow killers hunting him down came to the door. Under Seth's desperate pleas, Joseph softened and decided to help him this once. He hid Seth in an underground vault, then opened the door to face the pursuing colleagues alone. After a search, they couldn't find Seth, so they took Joseph to their boss. Joseph now faced a difficult choice. The boss gave him two options: either hand over Seth or hand over all his savings. Joseph had finally saved enough to retire in France. That was his lifelong dream. Give up his future for a friend. Was it worth it? There's a safe under the carpet. In the end, Joseph chose to protect his own interests, and that decision quickly had consequences. As the older Seth fled aimlessly through the city, he suddenly found his fingers starting to vanish. As he stood there in shock, the second finger disappeared as well. Next, his nose vanished. It turned out there was a mysterious link across space-time. When the younger Seth was captured and tortured, that pain instantly transferred to his 30 years older self. In the end, even his limbs were not spared. He desperately crawled toward the target spot with his remaining elbows, hoping to see his younger self one last time, but all that awaited him was a cold gun barrel. Meanwhile, in the room, the young Seth was enduring the cruelest dismemberment. This torture across time and space chilled the blood. Joseph saw his friend's fate with his own eyes. His feelings were a complex mix, but he had no time to grieve, because his own close-the-loop day had arrived. That night, he went to a familiar pleasure house to see the dancer he loved. But this time, he wasn't in the mood at all. Not just because his loop closing day was nearing, but also because she'd betrayed Seth to protect her own interests. At daybreak, Joseph put in 2 drops of the eye drops he was addicted to. He set out on the path to murder himself. It sounds absurd, but for a looper, it's fate. He arrived at the designated spot, set up his weapon, waiting for his 30 years older self to appear. By convention, the target should arrive on time, but this time something was off. It was already over a minute late, yet the target still hadn't appeared. This had never happened in the history of the loopers. Joseph grew uneasy. Could something have gone wrong? Suddenly, a figure flashed into view. But the person who emerged shocked Joseph. He wasn't bound, nor blindfolded. Worse still, the moment their eyes met, Joseph saw a pair of clouded, yet familiar eyes. They were his own. 30 years from now, time had carved deep lines into that face. Joseph froze. In those few seconds of hesitation, the course of space-time shifted. The older Joseph seized the moment and attacked. He punched his younger self to the ground, then fled without looking back. When Joseph came to, his mind was in chaos. He had just let his 30 years older self go, which meant he'd become a loop failure too. Joseph knew what was coming. He smashed the tracker on his body and began a life on the run. Now he had to evade his fellow killers, while quickly finding and killing his older self. Only then could he stay alive. But first he needed money and weapons. Joseph risked returning to his place, only to find the whole place ransacked. Worse still, on the silver bars they'd pulled out, he saw a cigarette butt still smoking, which meant the searchers might still be nearby. Sure enough, as Joseph was packing to leave, a familiar figure appeared at the door. It was his colleague and former friend, now turned hunter, coming to kill him. Facing a dead end, Joseph thought he was dead for sure. But at that critical moment, an unexpected savior appeared. It turned out there was another version of Joseph. Let's pull time back 30 years, to the Joseph who successfully closed the loop. Back then, Joseph didn't hesitate. When his 30 years older self appeared, he pulled the trigger without mercy. After receiving the massive payout, he didn't go to his dream France. Instead, he chose Shanghai, China. In that world, 30 years later, China had become the global hegemon, and Shanghai, the center of the world. At first, Joseph continued a lavish life, but the good times didn't last. 6 years later, his money started to run dry. By the 10th year, hooked on drugs, he survived only by robbery and murder. He became a notorious bandit, committing every crime imaginable. Just when Joseph thought he would keep sliding down the criminal path, going further and further, fate gave him a turning point. He met a woman he fell in love with at first sight. She had a distinctly Eastern gentleness and resilience. Her arrival completely changed Joseph's life trajectory. Under her influence, Joseph slowly turned over a new leaf. They fell in love and got married, then moved to a remote mountain village to live a quiet life. That simple, pure happiness made Joseph almost forget he had been a killer. He thought he could grow old with his wife and spend the rest of his life in that little village. But fate spares no one. Joseph forgot who he was, but the crime syndicate didn't. The 30-year term came due. When the men in black surrounded their cabin, Joseph realized that running wouldn't solve anything. Worse still, during the capture, Joseph's wife was accidentally killed while protecting him. Seeing the woman he loved lying in a pool of blood, the beast inside Joseph awakened once more. The once ruthless killer felt his blood boil again. Joseph killed all the captors, then plunged into the time machine. According to the rules, he should have gone back 30 years to be killed by his younger self. But now he had a bolder plan. If he could go back and change history, would his wife not die? He would go back to the past, not to go meet his death, but to change fate. He had already investigated that in the future there was a dictator called the Rainmaker. He was the one who ordered all loopers to be closed. The Rainmaker possessed telekinesis beyond ordinary humans. It's said he can control the weather and even kill anyone by sheer thought. Worse still, he single-handedly ruled all the crime syndicates. If he could be killed while still a child, then the future tragedy wouldn't happen and his wife wouldn't die. Following various clues, the older Joseph identified 3 children who might be the Rainmaker. His plan was simple: kill them all, to make absolutely sure. It sounds cruel, but to save the woman he loved, he was willing to do anything. Back in the current timeline, the young Joseph used the old Joseph's lost map to find one marked location. It was a remote farm, home to a single mother and her son. The woman's name was Sarah. The child was named Sid. As soon as she saw Joseph, Sarah raised her shotgun. In these turbulent times, a single mother must always protect herself and her child. She warned Joseph to leave at once, or she would shoot. But Joseph's addiction was flaring up, leaving him too weak to speak. Just as Joseph slipped into a coma, a small figure brought him water and food. That act of kindness saved Joseph's life. At daybreak, Joseph woke up in the barn. Sarah told him to leave before noon, but when Sarah saw the map in Joseph's hand, a string of numbers on it caught her eye. They were Sid's birthday and birth code. Joseph realized Sid was very likely the future Rainmaker. But what should he do? Kill an innocent child? After a few days together, Joseph found that Sid was just an ordinary child. He is smart and kind and likes inventing little gadgets, although he does have stronger telekinesis than others. But under his mother's careful guidance, he never hurts anyone. Joseph began to doubt his own judgment. A child this innocent and pure would really grow into the tyrant who destroys the world? Perhaps environment and education are what truly decide a person's fate. If Sid kept growing under his mother's loving care, perhaps he would never become the Rainmaker. But the older Joseph clearly didn't think so. He had already killed 2 other children and was heading to the farm to kill Sid. When Joseph saw dust rising in the distance, he knew the final showdown was about to begin. The older Joseph intercepted Sarah and Sid on the road. Facing the stranger who suddenly appeared, Sarah instinctively shielded her son. She pushed Sid toward the cornfield, while she stood in the older Joseph's way. That great mother would rather give her life to protect her child. Just as the older Joseph raised his gun to shoot, Sid, engulfed by fear and anger, finally exploded. A powerful telekinetic wave instantly swept across the farm. The older Joseph and Sarah were lifted into the air by the force. That supernatural power left everyone stunned. It's okay. I love you. Calm down. Good boy. Mommy loves you. Mom. The young Joseph finally understood the truth. The reason Sid becomes the Rainmaker in the future is precisely that he witnessed his mother's death as a child. That immense trauma filled him with hatred for the world, ultimately becoming a tyrant bent on destruction. And the culprit behind it all was the older Joseph before them. It was a perfect causal loop. The older Joseph went back to kill the Rainmaker to save his wife. But that act created the Rainmaker's very origin. The future Rainmaker, hating the looper who killed his mother, would order all loopers to be closed. That hatred would cycle endlessly unless someone could break it. At this critical moment, the young Joseph made the most important decision of his life. He raised his gun, aiming the barrel at his own chest, because he suddenly realized only his death could end the loop. If the young Joseph died, then the older Joseph would not exist. Without the older Joseph, no one would kill Sarah. Without that childhood trauma, Sid wouldn't become the Rainmaker. Without the Rainmaker, the future tragedy wouldn't happen. Joseph's wife would be alive and safe. A gunshot cracked through the silent farm. The young Joseph slowly fell into a pool of blood. In an instant, the older Joseph's figure began to turn transparent, then vanished from the air entirely. The timeline was corrected. History was rewritten. Joseph broke the cycle of hatred with his life. He proved true courage isn't killing the enemy, but sacrificing oneself to protect the innocent. Such great love transcends individual life and death and the limits of time and space. Through the sci-fi story Looper, director Rian Johnson explores the deepest questions of human nature. What is fate? What is choice? What is redemption? The film tells us true heroes aren't those with superpowers, but ordinary people willing to sacrifice for others. The film's depth goes far beyond its surface sci-fi elements. It makes us reflect on the complexity of cause and effect, on the cycle of love and hate, and how kindness can dissolve hatred. Joseph's story reminds us everyone has the right to choose. We can choose what kind of person to become and how we affect this world. The story of Looper has ended, but the reflections it leaves never end. In real life, each of us is the looper of our own fate. Our choices today decide who we are tomorrow. Let's be like Joseph. Have the courage to sacrifice for the greater good, and the wisdom to break the cycle of hatred. That's the profound lesson Looper wants to impart. True strength lies not in conquest, but in saving. True victory lies not in revenge, but in forgiveness. The true loop isn't about completing the mission, but in ending hatred with love. Next time, we'll talk about more jaw-dropping suspense masterpieces.